Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Plex Track's Friends Friday episode. We're excited to have you all with us. Thank you for taking time out of your busy weeks. I hope the week is winding down well for you and you're looking forward to a good weekend. We've got a fun episode today. I'm really excited about this conversation. We've been on a kick of talking about AI and security and its impact in not only just the security world in general, but also its impact in offensive security and then also threat actors and things like that. So we're joined today by Tim Schulz. Tim is a good friend and great practitioner, super sharp guy, and also the founder of Starseer. But I'll let Tim, for our audience's sake, please introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background, because I think that the audience will really be impressed, but I think it also kind of sets the stage for what we're going to talk about today. So.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Dan. Really appreciate being here and excited to be on an episode instead of watching it. So that's exciting. So yeah, a little bit about myself. So started my career sort of in security research at Sandia National Labs, MITRE. I spent some time with MITRE ATT&CK, and everyone's had to deal with that in one way or another. So you can probably blame me for some part of that, but. And then I've also done, some time in startup land. A lot of people know a lot of the purple team work that I did when I was at Scythe. And then most recently, before I co-founded Starseer, I was at Verizon and sort of worked on sort of building out their AI security program through leading the AI red team there.
Yeah, and don't apologize for MITRE ATT&CK. I think everybody loves it. Obviously, there's always going to be nuances, but I think MITRE ATT&CK has been one of the best things that's happened in the industry from a proactive security perspective, because it continues to bring to light what is causing breaches and what are the techniques and activities that threat actors are actually doing in the real world. And so I tout that all the time. As like, hey, if you can at least defend against the known knowns, you're in a good spot, right? And MITRE ATT&CK just continues to grow, but it highlights, it's a great community project, and I think when we as pen testers, when we talk about like the attack life cycle and what are true threat actors doing, MITRE ATT&CK helps bring that to a standardized nomenclature. So thanks for your work on that in the past and any contributions to it, I'm sure now. But yeah, so Tim, let's set the stage a little bit in terms of like AI security, because that's actually some of the stuff that you're working on with your startup.
Yeah.
But we're continuing to see AI evolve rapidly, and I think we've all predicted that threat actors and nation states will not only use AI to help them do their campaigns quicker and more effectively, but also I think that AI itself is a large attack surface, right? So
yep.
I'd be curious, just kind of like some of your thoughts of like, one, what you're seeing, and what are some of these techniques, and how quickly are you seeing some of this evolve?
Yeah. So I mean, there's just so many different layers to it, which is what makes it such an interesting problem, right? And it's a challenge, right, for security teams, because we've got, on one aspect, we've got like the sort of, I'll say, the application security types of vulnerabilities like that are resurfacing, right? Because we have a lot of teams that like data science teams and stuff like that, that necessarily, haven't been trained to the same degree that AppSec teams have for the past 10 years on, OWASP top 10 and some of that are now like, hey, in addition to any other challenges you had with a web app, you now have a chatbot that's attached to it, or right, is taking in user input. And so there's been a while where we're sort of rediscovering all of those challenges, and it sort of reintroduced an attack surface that people were kind of familiar with. But I think the challenges with AI as a whole is that, and this was one of the things that was really a stark thing that, finding out a few years ago, is that we don't really have, there isn't a great understanding of how the models are making the decisions, right? Mm-hmm. We can sort of see the inputs, we can see the outputs. Mm-hmm. We don't really have a really good in between. And so the parallel I'm going to draw here is really to, like, in cybersecurity, what we've come to expect from like EDR, right? And writing detections and things like that, it comes down to, we expect to have logs not only at like firewalls, right, network logs, whether that's NetFlow or something, but host and endpoint logs, right, whether it's using sysmon and or having an EDR, having an agent on the machine, where we sort of get that like really host level logging and telemetry. And the problem is, for AI, there really hasn't been that. And so that's really limited a lot of the ways that I'm going to say we can even start to understand what are the attacks that are happening to AI models. And we'll dive into a couple specifics, but I think we don't have that sort of baseline like telemetry to even start like building out really good AI like CTI and things like that. And so I think that's a big gap. And I think that's been something that hasn't that maybe isn't as well understood. So that's something that I'm really passionate about, like talking about like, hey, this is this area. And not only is this a gap, but that's something that we're looking and trying to fill, is like, how do we start building out and enabling teams to have that additional layer of telemetry so they can essentially start looking at specific attacks.
Yeah. I mean, because I mean, I think it's interesting, because like you said, one, it adds a new attack surface, but obviously everybody in the world is like trying to implement AI to help go faster, and in a variety of capacities, not only in the products that they might be delivering, of like adding an AI model to the product that they deliver for their customers, but also just using it for business operations and back office type of work. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to like how can we trust it, right? I mean, and so it's still a little bit of a black box to know like what is it actually doing, and then and just like we have supply chain concerns on other open source software, I mean, like there's definitely going to be supply chain concerns, with respect to AI models.
Absolutely. And I think like that's like right now we've seen a lot of organizations are like dipping their toe in the water with like, all right, we're enabling enterprise versions of Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, right? Tends to be like, what type of shop are you? Microsoft, or something else. And I think that as organizations start looking at the bills associated with costs, right? Because at first what we saw was people were kind of like that met the initial needs and experimentation. But as we've sort of moved into this agentic era, right, where instead of me asking a question, getting a response, maybe going back and forth a few times, the challenge is for a lot of orgs that are testing things out is an agent, right, that goes and searches the web for you or does something, that we would say is hopefully like very useful, right? A task. It's taking 12, 15, 16 steps. And so when you look at the cost of that, we're seeing a lot of organizations say, I don't know that I really want to eat the bill from trying that out on one of the sort of frontier models, because it's almost sometimes like, I'll make a car analogy here, right? Of like, you're using, essentially a Ferrari, right, to go down the street. And so it's like that's maybe like a mismatch between the capabilities of what it has, and like, yes, it'll get you from A to B, but you might be able to use a scooter or something like that. And I think that's where we're seeing like recently there's been a big shift to talking about sort of smaller, more specialized models. And a lot of way teams are doing that are they're taking open source or open weights models. And what that means is that you can go and download it from a place like there's like third-party repositories like Hugging Face, and that is the name of one. That's what I have to every time people are like, is that a real thing? I'm like, really? Yes, it is.
Nope, it is.
Got the logo to match, like GitHub and those types of things. But the challenge is there's no sort of right now. There's not a whole lot of like. There's no checks on who can upload any of those things. I mean, it is like GitHub. It can be literally anybody. It can be a friend, an adversary. It can be somebody experimenting. And so that's really one of the challenges, though, is that teams don't have a ton of like assurance and like visibility into, okay, this model says it's like a variant of something that Meta released or that Google released, and that it was fine-tuned, right? It was made to be more specific to, a use case that we care about, whether it's answering customer support tickets, whether it's trying to browse the web or use tools or things like that. And that is where, for instance, that is where the supply chain side of it comes in, where you can have people that have put, backdoors or tampered with models. And so that's where the things where security teams, there's just a lot of unknown risk associated with some of these, and trying to surface those is something that teams are really trying to dig into and figure out what is my actual risk level with these.
Yeah, yeah, and that's, I mean, and it's fascinating. And so, when we talk about kind of like the building the trust, right? You have to have some way to inspect the models, as well as make sure that it's not doing something on like calling out to a nation state, right? But
Yes.
sending stuff out just like any other, like just how you would do any other kind of source code audit, but like
Yep.
it's a lot more difficult, right, with these models. And I think you're right in that people aren't going to want to just continue to pay the higher costs, so they are going to see, hey, where can we pull in these open source models or different flavors of different models for different purposes. So like, what are you seeing? I mean, or what have you started to see? I mean, is this a legitimate threat? Like, are we seeing nation state actors start to disrupt the supply chain? Or, I mean, obviously, like, we can be paranoid about it, but paranoia, can be paranoia until it actually happens, right?
Yes. And I think that's one of the challenges in, like, I see this as like one of those where, again, there's so many parallels between like security as a whole and all of the things we've been through as a like security community, and then AI security, where there's a lot of times like there will be some new prompt injection or jailbreak, right, that like just spreads like wildfire on social media. And so it becomes, hey, invisible Unicode characters and some of that stuff. And, I remember when people were crashing iPhones, right, because they put that as their, Wi-Fi ID. So that like we're what's old is new again. And so I think like with some of this, though, what the challenge has been that there's not a great understanding of how like AI models are like packaged and deployed by security teams. And so the challenge with that is like that's a visibility gap where you have teams that are like the business teams right now, right? Because AI is moving so fast, they really can't stop and be like, really, should we think about this a ton? Like, because that, whether it's the board or the CEO, right, is giving of a lot of public companies, you see this, there's this pressure for this like efficiency and this mandate of like, hey, we need to drive this. And so those teams are really like, they're having to do like news cycles every time something new comes out. Like, oh, hey, do we need to swap this out? Like, what efficiencies do we gain? So that's where security teams, I think, have been trying to like figure out, all right, what does the threat surface look like, and how do we start diving into this? And I think that is where we've seen, I'll give call outs to folks that have published it. Like Hidden Layer has published something called Shadow Logic. JFrog has also touched on some supply chain issues. And so that's something we're looking at publishing some of our own work around that too, as we're looking to do more scanning of like, hey, what is out there and sort of what does an actual threat report look like with some of these supply chain issues. But I think there has been examples out there, and some of them are, I'll call it the traditional security things. It's not that you need anything super AI. You don't need to be an AI expert. It's like somebody packaged a Metasploit payload and was able to shove it into a model file, right? Mm-hmm. And they made it so, all right, when you run the model as you're trying to do to get like to chat with it, it calls a reverse shell. Like that level, like we have seen that multiple times. That's been like a recurring issue. And so now, though, as we start to dive deeper, that's where that thing like Shadow Logic, these backdoors are much more nuanced. They're much more subtle. Mm-hmm. Where, for instance, one of the things is we've seen CrowdStrike had a report where one of the Chinese models, if you identified yourself as from a specific group, it would actually potentially generate less secure code for you. And I think those are the things that are, I'll say, again, subtle, but they can have a widespread impact in the organization, because as AI is leaned on to you do more generative AI like code, if the base model is generating insecure code, you are just proliferating out vulnerabilities across your entire organization without even realizing it.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it never ceases to amaze me how creative attackers can be, right? I mean,
Yeah,
like, that, like what you just said there in terms of like, oh, it's recognizing that this might be a target. Yeah, yeah, that I want to, this might be a victim target for me, right? Like this
yeah,
might be an organization or an agency that I want to actually penetrate, right? So I'm going to produce, if it's asking me to produce code, I'm going to produce the code that I want it to have.
yeah,
I mean, and right now, how do you discern, right? And how do you know the model is doing those kinds of things? So I think that it's just a fascinating landscape, right? And like just recently, Google, the Google Threat Intelligence Group, which I think that's formerly known as Mandia, right?
yes.
Um,
They have that like in parentheses every
yeah,
time they
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But they recently released their report on just kind of the advances that they're seeing in the TI world on attackers using AI in malware, or helping it generate malware. So things like being able to, once they're in an environment, making calls out to other LLMs to help it generate shellcode or exploitation techniques on the fly, which obviously is gonna help perpetuate an attack faster because it's already in the environment. It knows now the tech stack or like kind of what it's dealing with, and it's not, it can try to avoid the signatures of whatever EDR or MDR it's trying, that's
yeah,
there, right? Stuff like that is interesting, right? In fact, I think I wrote in my newsletter just the thing that kind of always that kind of was interesting to me, that like I used to do capture the flags all the time,
yeah.
right? I loved capture the flag. I participated in a DEF CON qualifier once when I was in grad school under the School of Root guys, but
Mhm.
I didn't do any of the things at DEF CON, but what I thought was interesting is like this, what they identified was some of this malware where it's calling out using the Gemini API,
Yeah,
and trying to get it to generate shellcode for it or some kind of exploit code. And Gemini has protections against that, right? Like I think us as security folks, we know, like, oh, if I just go ask it to generate me generate me a ransomware payload, it's not going to do that.
yes,
But this is where prompt inject, it's like it's using prompt injection. So what they did was they said, hey, I'm participating in a CTF event. I'm doing some research, and I heard like I need to do this type of thing, and it bypassed to get to get the
yep.
exploit code out. It's like, this is genius. I mean, it's like you have to chuckle sometimes as like how
Oh yeah.
creative it can be, right?
No, they the like and that's the amazing thing is you see these like elaborate scenarios, right? That some people come up with around like here is like, they're like it's a CTF or like legal says it's okay, right? Like you have all these really sort of nuances that make this a really interesting but difficult problem for like the security systems that we've had, right?
Yeah,
Because we built around like, hey, there's certain parts of payloads or elements where we have control or we have knowledge of like how this is supposed to work. And because this is such a new technology that's moving so quickly, and like new model types are coming out and new like there's no standard for like how models are even deployed. They are deployed 100 different ways. And
yeah,
so it actually makes trying to build a single set of things to like, all right, do scans, to look for backdoors, to do this. It's a really difficult engineering task. But I
mhm,
think that's one of the challenges is like, how do we like tackle all like from supply chain to, yes, these very elaborate prompts that are essentially going to mean that people can use legitimate like state of the art API services to essentially generate their shell code, right?
yeah,
And that's where the nuance of language is very difficult to secure, because what's the difference, the difference between, hey, I want to encrypt a file on my computer to keep it safe,
yeah,
is that is intent behind the action, right? It's like,
right,
all right, is this being asked by a user that, hey, they are trying to secure it, or somebody, a ransomware group?
right, yeah.
And like it's a hard problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it, just it's a new frontier in security landscape in general. it's going to be a challenge. For a long time to come. I mean, I think this is why I think the U.S. is in a quote unquote arms race from an AI perspective. But I think also just to call out that we see infiltration of espionage from nation state actors into U.S. based companies already, right? Like that's a known thing, and so I think the principle. I mean, I'd be curious your thoughts on the principle of kind of a zero trust within AI in general, and how do we go about securing that? Because what are good principles even with the supposedly like known good services like Gemini and Copilot and things like that. I'd be or OpenAI or whatever. So
Yeah.
I'd be curious some of your thoughts on that.
Well, I think like I've heard lots of different approaches, and I'm sure there's like of trying to how do we apply like role-based access control, right, to AI models. And I think that's a really difficult set of things. And I've heard some people refer to, hey, this seems like it could be an identity problem. But I think ultimately the challenge is that a lot of the signals that you need to essentially build out whatever solution that would be is you need to understand how the model's making its decisions, right? Because if you want to see, hey, like, MCP servers have been, the new hotness, and, they have no authentication as part of the standard. Right. And so that was kind of an early on, like thing that everybody in security is just like, oh, come on. Like,
here we go again. Like we created the internet and we knew this. Right. We've done this before.
Yes. So now you have people asking like, well, if we add authentication, like how do we make sure that the LLM knows that the user is supposed to do it? And I think a lot of what we've seen with like the defenses, like for instance, Google had a really interesting like system called Camel, and there's a lot of things even in AI that are somehow named Camel. I don't know how we can't come up with at least something slightly unique, but it made sense in the acronym. But the idea was that essentially having LLMs, like, and this was for prompt injection and some of that, but essentially generate code that could be reviewed by like code review tools, right? That things that we have known metrics, we have known outcomes, known validations for. And I think like that's something that we're also seeing as people try and specialize the models now when they're trying to build them. And so that's why I think I really have like advocating for security teams to really get in on the like understanding how people build this, not just because, oh, well, you need to understand it so that you can secure it, but also because there's ways that we can actually build tools for security practitioners that will help aid in some of these. And some of it is validators, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have, all right, is this a valid input? Is this valid output? How do we sort of take the models and continue to sort of drive them in the way that we expect? And how do we have outcomes from them that, yes, 12 months ago, everyone was like, yes, human in the loop, everyone's going to review everything. Now everybody's like, well, I mean, we want to have logs so somebody can go look through them afterward, right? And so that's kind of where the changes have come in expectations. And I think that's where trying to understand how do we validate whether the model had whether the model is generating something, a call, right, to, a certain service that then you say, all right, it's making a call on behalf of this user, right? And so those are the types of things that can help us apply some of the controls that we already have in place. But I think it's taken, like, I'm going to call it the like enterprise or the security sprawl, right? Of like all of the different ways that we're having to manage all of the different technologies deployed as part of business now, where now you're adding something that, hey, if I connect my Claude, to or Open or ChatGPT to everything, it does help, right? Help me get my job done faster. I can say, hey, go check my email for this, pull in references from, this file or this thing, help draft an email. And it's like, that might take me 15 minutes or something, or even 10 minutes before. And it's like, cool, I can get that done in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And so then the question becomes, all right, like what, like, how does that sprawl? How do we start to control that? Because there's a lot of things that, I'm going to say teams have had permissions issues they haven't worried about because, or they haven't been unearthed before. And we've seen that now with AI, where it's like, hey, you start hooking it up to an internal knowledge base, and it turns out there are passwords that somebody put there that no one found, but the AI does. And so I think that can lead to leakage or whatever. And so it's a really hard problem. I think there's a lot of smart people trying to solve it, but I think right now trying to get like a zero trust environment, it's going to be like the best case, I think, from my perspective, is try and funnel everyone through at least one or two services, or a minimum amount of services that you have, like, I'm not going to say full control over, but you have at least organizational trust, right? Whether you have that at a legal perspective, like, hey, we've signed contracts, we have this in writing, we have some of these, right? If you are using external model providers, if you have internal models and things are hosted, is understanding, hey, how do we categorize these and like make sure everybody's using the approved ones? But I think like it's a really difficult problem right now. I haven't seen anybody that's solved.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a silver, like there's not going to be a silver bullet, and that's why it is its own domain. I think from an AI, like when we talk about AI security in general, I mean, like, man, there's just so much stuff, right? I mean, and it's just like exacerbating a lot of the things that we've already had challenges with, right? Like permissions, scope creep, and default passwords everywhere, or and just and even supply chain risk, right? So like I think that it just continues to add another layer of complexity. So like anything, it's like proceed with caution, right? Is definitely you can have a zero trust mindset even if you don't have technical controls in it.
Right? Yes. Anybody, like, I think everyone feels they're behind. Like that's the other thing that I'll put out there is like, talk to every team is like, we know we're behind, and I'm like, I don't think I've literally ever talked to somebody who's like, you know what, we're doing good, right? We got it locked down. Like if somebody told me that, I would be highly suspicious, because there's no one person or even team of like at a reasonable size that can keep up with all of the things happening. There's just so many things in different parts of AI and security, and you have like, for instance, even like we're seeing, the frontier model builders now have like talked about that the cyber capabilities, right? Where you have like OpenAI released Aardvark, they talked about Aardvark, which is their like vulnerability researcher, version of ChatGPT. And then you have like Anthropic has talked about some of their recent evals, and Google has like, CodeMender, as well as I think that Big Sleep and some of that's from their Google Project Zero. And so you're not only dealing with AI specific like threats, but also how AI is then leveraging capabilities that we're all familiar with in a new way, or in a way that scales much further than before. So like everyone's behind, don't feel bad. Like I think that's where like this is something that everyone it's better to go together, forward type thing.
Well, and I think that's why we have these kinds of conversations, just to kind of keep people focused on like, oh yeah, like we're not good. Like, I mean, like there's still a long way to go, and make sure we're keeping this on the radar, and having a trust but verify, a continued trust but verify kind of thing. I mean, I would say like you said, like everybody feels behind on AI and everything, right? It's like, oh, everybody feels behind in deploying AI. That may be an okay problem. You don't know, but yeah. So I think that's a fascinating conversation. I know we could probably spend a lot more time. I know we're kind of touching up on the time that we have for today, but yeah, Tim, super insightful. I really appreciate like you coming on. Is there anything that you'd like to share about kind of the stuff you're working on? And I know your company is doing some really cool stuff. So I'd love to just give you a little time to kind of plug that, and where can people find you? So.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for driving the conversation here. So, I mean, at Starseer, we're helping teams that are just getting started in their AI security journeys, sort of categorizing. We've sort of built out this sort of 3 tiers of maturity that we're working through teams with, which really comes down to sort of managing what you have or what you think you have, as well as then sort of enforcing security controls, and then building assurance for business use cases. And so helping teams sort of lock down supply chain so they can move more models and use cases and agents on-prem, and sort of the additional security and control that you get with that. So we're very excited to continue to work with more and more customers. We'd love to learn more about how we can help anybody with their security journey. So I'd say check out the website at that's www.starseer.ai. And I think overall, like we're going to continue, being the team for other teams and sort of keeping up with these trends.
Yeah, awesome. Well, good. Yeah, good stuff. Exciting times ahead. I'm sure we'll have you on again and be able to discuss all the changes in the landscape, and could even have it next month. You never know.
yeah, exactly.
Well, hey Tim, thanks again. For taking time out of your busy schedule, and hope you have a good weekend. And for everyone else out there, have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. And we will catch you next time.